everybody. Welcome back. Today we speak with Lance Cayko, who's the owner and co-founder of F9 Productions, which is an architecture studio. Now, this was a really cool conversation. Lance is a very smart guy. He has a lot of hobbies. He's done a lot of things. And I use this as an opportunity to speak with him about architecture, construction, real estate development, all of the different construction trades that go along in that, how you go about planning a house or a building and then actually, manifesting it into reality. And Lance is super knowledgeable about every step along the way. So this is a really cool conversation, especially for me. I've always been interested in this stuff and never able to do it myself. So give this a listen. I'm sure you'll find it just as interesting as I did. Lance, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I was reading about your background and, looking at all of these different contractor type things that you have like expertise in. And this is always, guys like you are so impressive to me because I have no experience in that. I have no ability to do any of those things. And I remember, before we started recording, I was telling you about the house that I had in North Carolina. And when we bought that house, I had all these things that needed to happen. I was like, I wanted a gym built and I wanted like turf laid down in the gym and I wanted a big projector screen hanging and all these things. And I remember I just went on like Google and found some GC that like lived nearby and had him come over and look at the space and told him what I wanted. And it was like painting. There was putting gym equipment together. There was all these different things. And he was just like, yeah, no problem. I can do it. And he did it all perfectly. And
wow.
It just blows my mind. Like, how do you think about explain to me? Because in my mind, there's like carpentry, there's electrical, there's paint, there's like, how do you break down all those things, reading blueprints? How do you think about this, the whole world of like construction and trades? And how does that all make sense to people like you?
We boiled this down to some of our first employees in the construction firm about 4 or 5 years ago. So
Okay.
we have an architecture firm, we have a construction firm, we have a real estate development firm, we have a bunch of different companies. If people ask me what I do, I say kind of serial entrepreneur, which leads to, you're contracting different things, services, products, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And when we first hired the first entry level folks who never even really worked construction, in the traditional sense, which I like because I want to teach them from the ground up. I go, look, you got to just relax. All we're doing is stacking shit on top of shit. And that is it, because that is essentially what you're doing with construction is you're either piling stuff on vertically. And then even after you do that, right, you're starting with the foundation and then you're stacking. And then you're stacking on the inside to further inside and stacking from the outside, further outside. That's the way I just try to boil the whole thing down. And if you can just wrap your head around that, it's like, oh yeah, we are just stacking shit on top of shit. And then we can start to talk about like the nitty-gritty details of the blueprints and reading them and what it translates to when we start doing the stacking.
Okay. And of that whole like process, do you have like a favorite part of the process? Is it the design of the stacking? Is it the actual stacking itself? Is it how do you think about that?
Oh yeah. If I was to break it apart too, right? So
Yeah.
The architecture side of things, the most fun part is the design part. And it's usually like about 50% of the project is actual design. For us, we have 4 different processes or steps that we work through. And the first 2 are schematic design and design development. Schematic design is we're just looking at floor plans, space planning. And then we start to look at what it looks like from the outside and the inside in a third dimension, right? Like we're doing the modeling, spinning around on the computer. That's the most fun part with architecture. Then you get into the details and it gets not so fun because and the time slows down and you're really having to engineer things and do all that stuff. Construction wise, it's sort of the same thing. Like the first half of construction is so fun. You're digging a hole, you're pouring a foundation, and then you're framing. And that's really the most fun part because you're really seeing the thing come to life and you can see it come to life so quickly. And then we get done with framing and maybe we put a roof on and some of the siding and mechanical, electrical, plumbing guys come in, and then it looks like nothing happens 4 months, even though there's a lot that's happening. It's just so incremental and slow. Putting the guts in the building, it gets a little boring. And the part everybody hates about both of the processes, and I think this is indicative of whatever you're doing, is like the last 5% of whatever project is very, very hard, and it takes the longest. You want it to be done, but it's also one of the most important. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you actually explained all that, because I think there's a lot of people out there. I'm thinking about my parents who recently like bought and renovated this house, and they get very frustrated at the later stages when it's like, are they even doing anything? Like, what? Why is this taking so long? Like, are these guys just slacking off all the time? And what you're telling me is they're probably not slacking off. It's just sort of built into the process at that point that it is sort of slow rolling toward the
Oh
end.
yeah. Oh yeah. And everybody's, the halfway point is too when starts people like owners start to get a little tired, and they can get a little testy, and they've been writing checks for a while. And then that last part is where it really starts to get painful, because it's like, oh my goodness, we've, even though it's a, like, let's say it's a new build,
Hmm.
there's still going to be the surprises. Like, it doesn't matter how many times we try to architect or engineer it ahead of time, and we're 3D modeling and like doing clash detection, where we're like saying like, where is the HVAC coming compared to the beam, so we avoid that conflict in the field. There's just still something that's going to fall through the cracks. That's a surprise that the owner's going to have to write a check for, and it just kind of gets exhausting. And I say that, even being, playing the other side of the coin too, having having designed and built a custom house with my wife and our 4 kids at one point in life. I didn't get to build it myself. Actually, we had a developer build it, and a
Hmm.
builder build it, and it was just part of the deal. He became a very good friend, but for us, like, the last 45 days was, oh my god, it was so painful. It was so hard. We were just we were so just sick of writing checks. We were just like, we just need to be in a house and not a hotel for this last 2 weeks, type of thing. So I have total empathy for people. We try to advise them in the best way we can. And one of the things we try to really emphasize is, like, some people think if we're going to remodel their house that they're going to live in it at the same time, and I just really don't recommend it. It's already the hardest thing. One of the hardest things you're going to do is build.
Yeah.
If even if you do only do it one time in your life, it's like, just please trust us and see if you can find a place for 6 months or something.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
A couple other questions I have to wrap my head around this whole, construction space that I don't fully understand. Although I have a lot of clients that are construction trades, but I'm helping them on the business side of things,
Okay. Yeah.
not on their side of things, the
Yeah.
delivery side. Um, is there like a big difference between understanding electrical versus carpentry versus plumbing, or is it very common for people to learn all three because it's like once you know one, you easy to learn the next one?
It doesn't hurt to. So I think it can't. There's definitely something you're pulling from each of those to
Hmm.
better understand the other one, for sure. They're definitely distinct, but they intersect, and they have to. So if the plumbers do have to know a little bit about the framing, and the framers do have to know a little bit about the plumbing, because there's always this intersection that happens of like how we meet and what
Hmm.
we should do, and if we're really trying to have a good team. I think that's one of the things that maybe general contractors or builders, whatever you want to call them, fall short on about selling themselves to
Hmm.
the general public, is because everybody thinks it's just like, oh, we're just, the general contractors are sleazy, and they're just they're making so much money, and they just want to cause problems and all these other things. And it's like, why would I even pay them? Like, what? Like, what? I can do this, and people have seen HGTV so many times. The real value, I think, of an experienced general contractor, somebody who's maybe had a team together for about 5 to 7 years, which is
Hmm.
honestly where we're at right now. I mean, we're still technically, we're coming out of the startup phase in our construction firm, but
Hmm.
we have now, like, all the subs and my carpenters that I employ directly.
Hmm.
We all know who we are. Like, we've worked with each other enough on different projects to where we are finally starting to look out for each other and
Okay.
play nice. And because that's the thing, is like, once framing is done, then the baton gets handed to those other trades you're talking about: mechanic, electrical, plumbing. And
Yeah.
that's what I think, that's one of the biggest values of a experienced general contractor that I wish they would start pushing to the back to the public, is saying like, yeah, our team though has been doing this for like a decade, whereas homeowner, if you're going to go GC this yourself, first time, good luck, like, go for it.
Yeah, probably not going to be your forever home.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, another question I've always had on this is, you see, obviously, some buildings are or homes are super cookie cutter. It's like
Mhm.
very easy, you know, and then you have other ones that are like extremely luxury, Frank Lloyd Wright, crazy design type stuff. When it comes to, obviously the design team, the architects probably have two very different skill sets designing those two different types of buildings. What about when it comes to the construction side of things? Is a construction team able to basically build anything as long as you've given them a good design? Or are there construction teams that are like, we're actually capable of building insane luxury, crazy design stuff, whereas those guys are not?
Yeah. There's so not architects are all created equal. I think definitely there's still problems with a lot of older architects that have not decided to evolve out of honestly either drawing the drawings by hand or AutoCAD where it's just 2D lines.
Hmm.
And there was a big shift that happened in the early 2000s where a lot of us started moving into the 3D world, and we
Yeah.
moved to a couple different kinds of platforms instead of just the 2D lines. And so if you're working with an architect who is like us that is working in the third dimension and we are trying to do that sort of conflict resolution, I think I think you have a better chance at almost anybody building it well, but there is a huge difference between the production builders and the custom builders no matter what. And those guys, the production builders are just there to bang it out and get it done, and they're stepping over pennies to get to dollars. And a
Mm.
lot of times it's the opposite with the custom world where it's like we're stepping over dollars to get to pennies sometimes, which is actually where it gets a little painful for us is because it's like I understand that you're tired of writing checks, Mr. Client, but this is a $3 million home. Are we really squabbling over $400 of a cleaning bill? And at the same time, and like in the same like maybe it's the same meeting too. They're like, oh yeah, sure, that tile's 10 grand. It's like, why are you beating me up over $400 cleaning bill? So there's this sort of ratio that I'm finding because we don't do all high end stuff. We're doing a production build right now where it's we're converting a commercial building into apartments in the middle of the city we operate in,
Hmm.
and that client is vastly different than the super high end type of clients that we're working with. So
Hmm.
I do think though, like some people are suited better for each other, but that nexus point about where you're starting from a lot of it comes from the architect and the designers.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. When you mentioned, you guys at your firm or your team, you have a couple different things. Was one of those things real estate development?
Yeah. So in 2017, we finally bought a piece of land. I mean, we've been looking for it for a while. We bought a third of an acre here in Longmont, Colorado, and then that's when we put on the third hat. We became real estate developers as well. So we're all three hats. And in my background here, I'm sitting in our office building that we designed, built, and developed for ourselves. Yeah. So we've tried to work. We've only done it one time because after we did the development COVID hit, we took a break. We just
Mm.
kind of relaxed a little, and then started building up the construction side of things. And I would like to do another development within the next maybe 2 or 3 years after we have the right staff in place on the construction side. Because it was just me and Al, and it was honestly mostly me playing architect, builder, developer. Like during this development, it was completely nuts. I mean, there was one period of time where I worked 80 days in a row. It
Mhm.
just couldn't take any breaks, to try to get it all done.
Yeah. What do you like better, the real estate development or the architecture?
Oh, it depends on the facet because architecture is very low risk, actually. So,
Mm.
like, I'm not going to go bankrupt, but the reward is also small. So,
Mhm.
like, I'm not going to go bankrupt if I'm drawing a house for somebody, if I'm designing
Yeah.
a house for somebody, but the monetary reward is going to be much smaller. If I go do the real estate thing, then I can lose everything actually, but the reward could be really huge. I mean, it could be life changing to where you're sort of putting yourself in a kind of a position where I think I'm kind of getting there actually. Of I'm 41, potentially being mortgage free by 42, which that's as a Gen X/millennial person, that's very. that's hard to get to. I mean, most millennials can't even afford a house today. So that's the biggest difference for them. I like them in equally different ways.
Okay. Yeah, and you're right. It is hard for people to get to mortgage free or debt free because I think so many of us have taken on student loans that we've got to get through. And um, speaking of like school, I was looking back at through some of the you did a lot of school, and one of the things that caught my eye was you were the winner of a best thesis award. What
Yeah.
was your thesis? I was very curious about that.
Oh, thank you. No one's ever asked me that. Beautiful question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Graduated in 2008 and did a master's in architecture. And the award that Nico is stating here is it's Peter F. McKinsey Award. So the college I went to school at is North Dakota State, and there's a graduating class of about 50 master's thesis every year, and you end up being a finalist of five. They pick out five, and then from there you can win it. The thesis was on. I grew up in Northwest North Dakota, and in the early 2000s, so 2008, like I was saying, the the population of North Dakota was actually shrinking,
Hmm.
and it was because there was just no real big economic development going on. And then all of a sudden they found out about fracking. And
Mm.
I so I the our state just totally got transformed, especially the western part, because of the oil and the natural gas exploration. And the town I grew up in was about 500 people, and to the east there was a town about 13 miles, has about 10,000 people when I grew up. And from 2008 to 2012, it went from 10,000 people to 40,000 people, and it just exploded, right? But I did the thesis right before that explosion happened, and my thesis was called Trenton 2020, and it was based on this little small town that I grew up in, which is half Caucasian, half Native American. So it has this very interesting cultural dynamic to play with, and it was a 12-year master plan. So it was literally my hometown that I grew up in. I just had all these ideas that I thought we lived in actually a very beautiful place, and that we have a lot of natural resources. I know a lot of people are like North Dakota, never been there. I don't blame you. It's in the middle of the country. It's cold and all that kind of good stuff. But like the western part of the state is actually rolling hills. It's beautiful. Theodore Roosevelt National Park is there. Um, and so that's what it was. It was part landscape architecture. It was part urban design. It was part architecture. It was just a holistic sort of thing. It was sort of like socio-economical and political too, because I was suggesting that the town incorporates, they get a tax base. I was suggesting that the Native Americans, of which I'm part of the tribe, that we should petition the federal government to become our own tribe, so we could have our own funding and control it instead of being 500 miles away from like the parent tribe in the northeastern part of the state. So yeah, it was. As a matter of fact, I have the presentation boards hung up in my condo, and I look at them every day, just as a reminder of like, don't lose sight of that kind of thinking. I really,
Yeah.
and as somebody now who's actually does real estate development and philanthropy with my community garden, like I try to build the place I live in and leave a positive impact. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like less of an architecture thesis and more of a campaign running for mayor of that town is what that sounds like.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
pretty
you
cool.
could say that for sure. Yeah, even though my grandpa at the time, God rest his soul, he's not with us anymore. But he, I showed it to him, and he was the tribal chairman, sort of, so to speak, and he
Mhm.
just kind of just dismissed it. And I was like, I don't know, like, well, because it's not your idea, type of thing. I did get
Mhm.
some built work out of it though. I actually did we had one store in town. It was a general store, like your classic small town general store. It had everything in it,
Mhm.
and it burnt down. And I was able to show my thesis to a developer after a couple years after I graduated, and they convinced them to hire us as the architect. So I did get to redo the general store in the town I grew up in, which is pretty fun.
Wow, that's awesome. Was that like and did you have your company at that point, F9
Yeah,
Productions? Oh, you did. Okay.
yeah,
But probably early
we were
early
just
days.
babies. Early days. Yep, we were babies. Yep. Still, now we're just toddlers.
Got it. And I want to ask some questions about that. Your company, F9 Productions, for sure. So the three legs of the stool, remind me what those are:
Yeah.
architecture.
Yep. Architecture, builder, custom builder. and then
Okay.
real estate development. Yep. And then F9 Productions is the architecture firm, F14 Productions is the construction firm, F12 Productions is the real estate development firm, and then we skipped F13 for we're just a little superstitious. So
Okay. And then is there I think there's a fourth leg of the stool you didn't mention, which is professional fishing. Is that also
yeah,
part of the company?
yeah. When I'm neglecting when I'm neglecting one of the three, yeah, then it is part of that company, 100%. Yeah. Hmm.
So what does it even mean to be a professional fisherman? Like you are able to enter into contests and you compete in the contest, therefore you're professional? How does that
You
work?
well, I love this question. I love this question because I've always been fascinated by it because like there's people that will like whether they're like customer adjacent, meaning like they weren't really a customer, but yet they're critiquing us or something
Mhm.
like that. And or just people in general where I hear this or I hear them go like, yeah, and that wasn't even is he even a professional? I'm like, well, what does that mean? So for me, the
Yeah.
definition is have you got paid to do something? Have you got paid to
Okay.
do something? Oh,
Yeah.
well, then I think you're a pro because you've convinced somebody whatever it is you're doing, you're worth being paid to do it.
Mhm.
That okay. Now is that like now we can talk about the varying degrees of quality and everything. So I have gotten paid to fish, right? Through the YouTube channel, through the news break channel, and then also through sponsors. So people that will send me like ice fishing last year. My cameraman and we got sent I think like $3,000 or $4,000 worth of ice fishing gear, and then we just had to talk about it a little bit and that sort of thing. And then there is the entering. Yes, I there's contests I can enter and win cash prizes and stuff like that. So that's the way I count it. And then just people kind of look to you when they look to you also as like an authority. Like I have people that reach out to me on Instagram on my fishing channel on Fishing with Lance, and they're always asking me, about where I was, if I'd be willing to take them fishing, stuff like that. And I've just met a lot of friends that way also
Yeah.
because I'm just like, yeah, sure, like I'll take you, and then we become buddies and hang out.
That's awesome. I that's another thing I'm jealous of you of is the ability to fish. It's something I've never had. Um, anytime I've been in a fishing environment and I've casted or whatever, and I'm sitting there waiting, it's like I never catch anything. Some people have a knack for it. We I was telling you before this, we've been living in Antigua this year, and we like rented a boat and went over to one of the neighboring islands. And the captain, once we slowed down the boat, he just like put a lure on a rod and cast it in, and like immediately caught this huge fish, like a 2 foot long fish. And I was like, God, I could never do that. Like, what is the secret?
I don't even know. It's such a good question. Such a good question because like there have been I've taken my like I took my girlfriend last fall.
Mhm.
I thought there's no like she's doing the exact same thing as me. I've taken other people and I'm like, okay, just just do this. And so I've took my girlfriend 4 or 5 times this last summer and last fall. Every time. And the last time I go, "Hey, like I'm not gonna fish until you catch a fish." This is I am embarrassed for myself that I haven't been able to put you on fish. I'm like really embarrassed. Like just so you know, and she was like, "But I want you to have fun." I'm like, "No, no, you need to catch. I'm like, I won't have fun unless you catch a fish."
Yeah.
So, I honestly don't know because I've tried to help people who have never done it before, and I watch them and they do the exact same thing. I guess if I had to really drill down on it, there's one video where my cameraman, I can't remember which one it is, like because we've done like 300 or 400 episodes or something, and
Mhm.
but I talk about like the positivity that you should have. You should like I really believe there's something to like just having a good attitude.
Yeah.
Because like my brother and we do a 2 week ice fishing trip up in North Dakota where he lives. I go up there for every Christmas for ice fishing every day. And if there's something that pisses him off right away in the morning when we're on the first go around, or me, and we have a bad attitude, it's so obvious what happens every single time. It's like I caught nine, you caught one, and look at your attitude. And so we try to like not do that. I think that has a lot to do with attitude.
I think you might be onto something because I scuba dive a lot, and
Mm,
definitely when I'm down there with the fish, and honestly, this goes for land animals too, I would say. If you are going into the encounter with a much better attitude and you're welcoming and you're clearly not afraid and you're clearly not threatening, they'll come closer, they'll be curious, you know. I just never thought that fish could sense that when you're on a boat and they're not even looking at you, you know. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's some sort of psychic wave thing that they
Yeah,
can
I
tap
mean,
into.
yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's I don't know. It's I swear every time I've had a really good positive attitude and and then there's been days where I go up in the mountains and I'm like, "Ah, I can't shake it. And like even if I try really hard to shake it and I can't, I'm like, that was a bad. I should just stay at home.
Yep. All right. So we got last topic I want to talk about with you is your company, F9 Productions. All right. So we're finally getting around to it. And I guess F14 and F12 as well. Um, but my question is really the first one is around, why did you even decide to go out on your own? There's a lot of really good architecture firms out there
hmm
you could have joined and
hmm
probably been compensated well. Why did you decide to also be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I love like those couple little things you were just kind of stated because I want to unpack those a little bit. Architects are paid very poorly right
Oh,
out of college, actually. Yeah, I know have this societal idea that architects maybe make a lot of money, and some do. Some make a ton of money,
hmm
but the ones right out of college, you definitely don't. And especially if you just sort of stay company man, company woman
hmm
depending on the environment, you might not ever make a lot of money. You might only go sort of get to like middle to high middle class. That's about it where you're at. I also graduated in 2008, and everybody knows what happened in 2000, like late 2008 and early 2009, which is the Great Recession. So when I graduated, I interviewed with 7 firms down here in Colorado, all over Aspen, Boulder, Denver. We went over the whole state, and nobody would hire because the economy was starting to crumble. I stayed in touch with this one firm in Boulder over the summer, and then they finally pulled the trigger and hired me down here for a very, very low wage. It was like $18 an hour at that time. And Boulder County is one of the most expensive places to live. It's like a third most expensive place to live per capita in the United States. It's like right behind San Francisco. Super
oh
expensive.
wow.
Yeah, we have a lot of tech giants and stuff down here. And so took the job, and I lasted 9 months, and then the economy really did take a crap, and we had Lehman Brothers happen, and the whole Wall Street meltdown, and then the housing crisis and all of that kind of good stuff. And so I got laid off, and there was no at that point too, like 50% of the architects in the architecture community were laid off after the Great Recession. It was that devastating to architects, engineers, contractors, anybody who was dealing with sort of housing and building. Nobody was lending, nobody was building. So I had no, and I also had I had 2 children at the time. I was married, very very small children. We weren't about to move back to North Dakota, so I had no
Mhm.
choice actually than to fall back on my carpentry skills. And I put out a Craigslist ad, a couple of them, and I never really looked back after that. So I worked for cash for 3 or 4 months, never took out unemployment. And then eventually, through this, I was doing some 3D modeling. A lot of it, I got noticed online from this company called Turbo Squid, and they said, "Hey, we're there's a lot of manufacturers right now that are. I know I mentioned this earlier on the show that are switching from AutoCAD over this 3D software, and we need somebody to turn all of their 2D stuff into the 3D stuff. Are you
Okay.
interested?" I'm like, 100%. So stayed in touch with them, and then eventually got into this pipeline of work that allowed me to taper off the handyman stuff, get back into sort of an architect seat. And then just through my networking, I've always just had this sort of proclivity to be able to find work and find people that want to hire me in certain ways.
Mhm.
Outside of having an employer, I landed a house, I landed a clinic. I even had to take the clinic back to the firm that laid me off because we weren't licensed at that time, so we had to have a licensed architect. My business partner uh, thought when he got laid off in New York at the same time as me, oh, this recession is only going to last, a year. I mean, we don't know. We were just young 20-year-olds. We didn't know. We'd never been through this before. Lasted
Yeah.
way longer, right? And so he ended up going to grad school for a master's in construction. And then the recession lasted much longer. He's living with his mom and dad. And I go, hey, I got a house. I got all this BIM work. I got a clinic. The apartment's up to me, right kitty corner to me is open. It's a 1 bedroom. Like, how much cash do you got? And he told me in a couple months, and I go, well, let's try it. Like, I know we're not even licensed. So we have to be careful about how we even advertise and what we say, because we could only call ourselves designers. We can only do mostly houses and that sort of thing. But that's why we started the firm. That's 100% it. And I talk about the money part of it too, is that because then like I make what I want to make now today for sure. Upper middle class, kind of 1% sort of stuff, especially with all the different companies and everything. Like I don't worry about money. But that's why we did it. And I've just never really looked back. And what I love about it is like, I really tried to have that chip on my shoulder about the people who laid me off, because they were such poor business people. And
Mhm.
most architects are, which is, another reason why we started the podcast, because we were like, we should, if we're good at business, I think other architects should be good at business too. Like, why shouldn't we all be good at business? We should all be better at business and be more customer service oriented than just sort of like, look at our cool designs. Like, that's not what it's about.
Yeah. And you mentioned your podcast. So you guys have been doing a podcast for a while, and you not only talk about architecture and construction and that kind of thing, but you also just talk about running a business, being an entrepreneur, trials and tribulations. So I mean, and you're obviously, neither of you are trained in business like from a business school
Yeah,
perspective. So
neither of us.
just school of hard knocks. So what has been your, I guess let's say kind of like what's been your favorite thing that you've learned as you've been growing your business and being a CEO and all that stuff, and then maybe what was something you didn't see coming that was very, very challenging.
Oh, the biggest thing that I feel like we've learned and just earned is the confidence to say, I don't know. That takes a lot of balls, actually, and I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with our society, right? Is like the politicians or the institutional leaders. It's like, hey, like, society, people will forgive you. Like, can you just say you don't know, or like that you made a mistake, and take some extreme ownership? That's,
Yeah.
I think, the biggest thing. And it took us a while because we were so young when we started. We thought it was a weakness that we if we said we don't know, but really it's become a place of strength, for us, because I think it actually ends up, it depends on how the conversation and everything and how it comes out. But since I've really embraced that in the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years, it people like that because it also humanizes you. I mean, it puts you on a different playing field with them, and that sort of thing. So that's, and then the other part of your question of like what's most surprising is, I should have known this, but I guess I had to like do a trial and error of the whole thing. And that was, we tried to train up a couple, of our higher ups at the architecture
Mhm.
firm to do sales. And I even recorded sales meetings and put together like a training course, and like, showed him how the contracts work and all that. And he just failed miserably. He just failed so badly at it. Just awful salesman. And so the lesson was, it was like, oh, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can teach sales. Maybe I'm a bad teacher. Maybe I'm not. I mean, I've taught at university for 11 years though, so I don't think so. I think being a good salesperson is actually is sort of one of those gifts. And I don't think everybody has it. I don't think everybody wants it. It's a whole different thing. And so I realized like that's the only way I maybe will ever be able to step away if I ever really wanted to retire, is like, it might take a while to find that person who can actually sell and bring work in. And it was sort of like a weird pat on the back after the whole experiment. It was like, nope, that's why me and Al are the boss. That's why we're actually the CEOs and the executives, is because A, we can go out and sell, and then B, somehow we have the ability to make difficult decisions and have the confidence to do it, right? Even if it means me saying, I don't know, but I'll figure it out, type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is, and I don't know how big your firm is. We can talk offline. Probably don't want to broadcast it, but there are certain like levels that you hit as a company where you hit a level where it's like, the owners can't be the salespeople
Mm-hmm.
anymore. and
Mm.
you somehow have to find that correct salesperson. But, maybe it's not an architect who's learning sales. Maybe it is a professional salesperson who you're
Yeah.
teaching architecture to. That may be the only way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's a yeah, because my girlfriend does this to me and it drives me nuts. And I've had a couple of friends do this to it. Even with like a former employee said this once. They conflate salesmanship with like being braggadocious. I'm like, oh my god, it's actually the opposite. All like the best sales are when I'm just listening. I'm just listening and
Yeah.
taking notes and being empathetic, and then making sure that the potential clients know that I'm doing that. They're literally seeing me write the notes. They're seeing me then maybe after they're done talking, me going, "Hey, I just want to make sure I heard this. I just want to make sure I heard this because I was listening to it. Did I interpret that correctly? Oh, great. Here's how I can solve that problem. Then the confidence does come out, but it's like most of the meeting is actually just me just listening and being empathetic and trying to understand how I can solve their problems with our profession.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah.
I was actually on a call earlier with a prospect, and he just blatantly asked me. Um, he's like, should we kick off this project now, or should we maybe wait until the new year? Because in January I'm going to have a lot more free time to kick it off. And
Hmm.
um, I think most sales people would try to like figure out some way to say like, let's do it now, like, and give some
Oh.
sort of reason for urgency. And when I really listened to him and understood what he had going on through the end of the year, and I was like, you know what? Let's kick it off in January. I think that's going to be better. And that's just an example of like you've exactly what you just said. You've got to listen to them and actually try to solve their problem in the way that is
Hmm.
best for them.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to run into issues for sure.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so last question here, and then kind of want to wrap up. I heard you mention earlier something about your community and kind of
Mm.
like giving back to the community, and you strike me as a very enlightened guy who is not just grinding it out at work. You're trying to find balance in life. So how does the community aspect play into your life?
Yeah, well, I when I first moved here, and so the town I live in is Longmont, Colorado, and when I first moved here, we lived in an apartment for 5 years, and coming from North Dakota, I grew up between a cattle ranch and a sugar beet farm in a rural area, and like we raised our food, we slaughtered our food, and then we also grew our food. I mean, it was just that's how it worked, right? And so when I got here and I was finally not, killing myself in school and actually, I was like, oh, I'm only working 40 hours a week. Great. Now I have this free time, right? I really want a garden. Like, oh, I have this like yearning for a garden. And in an apartment, what are you going to do? Maybe put some plants on a balcony. That's not very much. The place we picked to live in is Boulder County. It's very, very progressive in some good ways and some bad ways. And one of the good ways is there's a lot of community. There's a lot of initiative for like urban gardening here.
Mhm.
So I just got on the computer and Googled community Longmont, community garden Longmont or whatever. Sure enough, one popped up. I applied, got a plot, and that's where my community involvement really began with the community garden. So it would have been like 2009. I became the garden leader the next year, and it was a different nonprofit in charge. It was Growing Gardens out of Boulder, and they held on to it for until 2020, and they kept growing these and making new gardens throughout Boulder County. And eventually they had too many, and they go, we want to give back local control. And they asked me if I would like local control, and I go, I've always wanted my own nonprofit. Like that's what like the best entrepreneurs do. The best entrepreneurs go, hey, it's time for me to start giving back, and like this is just part of the deal. This is like capitalism gets a really bad rap sometimes, and I'm like, man, the
Yeah.
capitalists, like, come on, like they give a lot of money. I mean, they do a lot of things. They're making the jobs like sure, some of them are real bad, but man, I just know so many. They're so generous with their time, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I started my own nonprofit in 2020, Longmont Community Gardens, and we started with just one location. It had about 45 plots, ranging from 10 by 10, 20, 20 by 20, 4 by 8. We have this really cool partnership with the city where they donate the water, which is amazing in Colorado, and then we lease the land from them for nothing. And then, but we just the idea is it's good urbanism because it puts more eyes on an area of the city that would otherwise not have people, and there'd be more crime and stuff like that. Plus, we're
Mhm.
empowering ourselves and growing stuff. We have a lot of like low income folks that come that don't have opportunities to garden, like I was talking about, from an apartment, a townhome, And they just said
Mhm.
like this is their opportunity to feed themselves. And then this last year we won a $86,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It took me all weekend to write. It was over 10,000 words, and we're doubling our size right now, even
Wow.
in a new location. So it's just totally cool.
That sounds awesome. And I'm guessing for the people who have like plots there or garden there or whatever, it probably becomes a little bit of like a social community as well. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's just I just don't know of anything more empowering than just growing your own food and just seeing it and going through the process. I mean, it's just like so endearing and like near and dear to my soul. Like one of my love languages is feeding people, and especially feeding people when I bring them into my house. Like even my buddies, like we'll go camping and they'll be like, "Well, I hope Lance brought his vegetables." Yes, I did. So I'll bring all these vegetables and like cook them over the campfire, and then we'll go catch fish and do that. And it's just like, it's like the best.
That is awesome. Well, Lance, thank you, man. Really appreciate you coming on here. I learned a lot, and you've got a lot going on, but it seems like you balance it well. And I will be out in Aspen in February, so I might have to hit you up and maybe we meet somewhere and hang out,
Yeah, yeah. Have a beer or something like that. That'd be great. Yeah, please do.
go fishing, bring some vegetables. All right.
Yeah, we'll do.